interesting story you have. Give me a little background on Recon and what you're all about.
Sure. We're looking for underexplored areas in the world with the potential for large discoveries of oil and gas. In particular, we noted how the shale revolution has changed things so much in the oil and gas industry in the United States and in Canada, and to a lesser extent Argentina and Australia. But the opportunities for those sorts of discoveries exist all over the world. And Namibia came out very high on that list. A very large basin in the northeast corner called the Okavango Basin. We took a license for that area, and now we're moving ahead to explore it.
What ReconAfrica is coming to do in Namibia is ecocide and genocide. Our San people, they are foragers. The food will be taken away from them. So ReconAfrica can reap profits. To what extent do our lives matter that we have to put ourselves on the front line so we can continue fighting this injustice that is being perpetuated onto our people, onto indigenous people all over the globe? What did we do to deserve this injustice? The fossil fuel industry is busy invading our homes. If these practices go on, there won't be a planet left.
Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us once more on this live stream series. My name is Alejandra and we're going live today in support of the group of protesters, which include members of the local Koe and San communities, who are walking nearly 1,000 miles to the Namibian embassy in Cape Town to protest against the drilling that is set to take place in the Okavango Delta. This is the second of our series covering this protest. And over the next week, we will be looking at what's happening on the ground in the Okavango, as well as talking with some experts about the systems that are currently enabling this ecocide and genocide to take place. And we will also discuss what solutions, what alternatives are there to a very complex but really important issue. Last week, we had Kofi Mawuli, the coordinator of Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network. And today, we're lucky enough to have Jeff Barbee joining us today. Jeff is a journalist, and he's a journalist that broke the story to the mainstream press, and he's also the founder of Lion Earth. Before going forward to hearing from him, here are some videos of the protesters themselves on the third day of their walk to Cape Town, to the Namibian embassy.
Good afternoon, XR family. My name is Vincent Chico de Koke, and I'm one of the Indigenous walkers. And I'm here today with a couple of my friends just to tell you a little bit more about our cause and why we're doing it and why it is imperative for you to support us on this cause. I would like to introduce my friend, Mr. Q7 Beckett, aka the Bushman, to just lead us into this and tell you more about it.
Good day, XR. I'm Q7 Beckett the Bushman. This is head lady of Pakkelsdorp, Ms. Blanche, and this is Chief Marvin. We are part of an indigenous community.
Yeah, people, welcome to the land of the Koi and the sun.
We are from here, natives from Southern Africa. We were found here by colonizers, we were found here by slave traders, we were found here by shipwreck people. And over the years, we've diminished. We are guardians of nature.
It's Wetlands Day, so this is how we will celebrate water, by celebrating water with water. And in that celebration saying, please do not destroy our water in the Okavango Delta. That water system is as precious as this one.
We live from the mountains, the deserts, the forests. And as this walk continues from Pakkelsdorp, George, to Cape Town, I would like to thank everybody involved in XR as well as their followers for following us. And as indigenous people, we're not one group. We have Ko people, we have San people, and we have Himba people, Herero people, and many other tribes in our southern hemisphere, especially in Southern Africa, that is supporting this walk because of us. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Welcome to our place, Pakkelsdorp. The last Khoi headman, Wolfman, was found the last living wolfman was found in Buckelsdorp. So Buckelsdorp is one of the richest places with the richest history in the Southern Hemisphere. So we, as the Buckelsdorp community, support these walkers. Go online, support them, and please sign the petition.
My name is Marvin Budboy. For me, it's a pleasure also to join this expedition, this walk from here, Buckelsdorp, George, to Cape Town. And for me too, I'm also begging everybody to give this walk a support, to support us in your prayers, to support us with signing of the petition, because that is a very rich water resource area that will be destroyed. Our people that side will also lose out on a rich water area that is there for them.
I'm David O'Byrne. I'm just going to explain to you a little bit about what is currently happening in Namibia. A Canadian oil company called ReconAfrica has begun test drilling at 2 sites for oil in the Okavango Basin geological formation. If these tests are successful, they hold a license to develop an area larger than 13,000 square kilometers in Namibia and Botswana. This area is in the watershed of the Okavango River, or the Okavango River, which eventually flows into the Niger Delta. We cannot risk cross-contamination from any drilling operations in that area. It is such an unbelievably sensitive ecosystem. And more than that, we are reaching a stage where us as consumers need to stand up to the oil companies and say that we do not need oil. We need sustainable solutions. And until we get those, we don't want any more drilling.
Well, there you have it, my people. We thank you all for following us, for supporting this fight that we are undergoing. So please go online, sign the petition, tell a friend to tell a friend. Stop drilling in the Okavango Delta. Thank you.
So it's great to hear from the protesters themselves. If by any chance any of them happen to be watching this, we're sending you all our love and support. Even from here and myself in the Canary Islands, from Gran Canaria and the UK, from all across the world. This film was made by Q. He's one of the protesters on the march. And although this protest so far may look small to some of you watching this, it's really important to remember that we're not seeing in this video the vast networks of people who are supporting this protest, who may not be there due to the current pandemic that we're living through right now, or because of their own safety fears due to persecution. And also, this march itself is happening in South Africa instead of Namibia for the same reasons, because of COVID restrictions. But it means these protesters are being very sympathetic and passionate about the cause, because after all, it's something that will affect everyone. And moving on, meanwhile, in Namibia yesterday, environmental consultants for Recon were made to hear the concerns of the local communities that would be affected by the drilling operations. This consultation is part of the process for getting permissions to start the seismic operations. And we have information that it's only the second of such public consultations that has happened in 5 years. As you will see in the footage that we will show next before talking to Jeff, these meetings are quite contentious. Reinhold, who is a young environmental activist and sustainable development postgrad, attended this meeting, and he sent us this video which uses footage from the Namibian media holdings and also the Namibian Sun. Let's go watch it.
Dear world, My name is Reynold Mangundu and I'm an environmental activist from Namibia. And today I stand and speak on behalf of the same people that lives in the Okavango. I speak on behalf of the innocent elephants, and I speak on behalf of Mother Nature that has been feeding us for many years. And I speak with a very sad voice for a company, ReconAfrica, crossed all over all the seas to come to Namibia and risk our life supporting systems. Is it really fair that we as Africans continue to suffer in the hands of greedy and capitalist systems? Is it really fair for us to let ReconAfrica risk every single prestige area in the Okavango? I have a message for the world, and let he who has an ear hear that as long as we stand as young Namibians that are hopeful for the future, we would not let them destroy our future. And today in the consultation meetings in Windhoek, we were reminded about the power of greed, the power of selfishness, because they were very arrogant to listen to the comments of Namibian people, of Namibian environmentalists.
What kind of community engagements were really done? If you are presenting this, was this translated in the indigenous languages? And also looking at COVID-19 times, where we are only 50 people, and you're talking about activities that are going to impact people's lives, you know, how many people did you really interview? We want to know. The village of Kawa has got 4,000 people. At last week's meeting, you had 9 people from that community. That is not community representation. How many of those were women and how many of those were men? Because a community is also comprised of women, not only men. Ne? And then again, you are claiming that your site is in nature. You put your drill on someone's Mahango field. It is right next to communities.
That's the drilling point. The communities are just next to the drilling point.
These people, they are being polluted right now. And on top of that, the match drill pit is not lined. You said that you would line it. Why is it not lined? Meaning that the toxins are going to go straight into the ground, into the Okavango Delta, because they're drilling right next to the Matako River.
As long as we stand as young people that are hopeful for the future, we are sending out a message in the world for you to stand with us and to fight not only for the same people, but to fight for the rest of indigenous people around the world that are suffering and that are being killed by these exploitive systems. How sad is it that even in a time when COVID-19 came to destroy the world, there are still exploitive systems trying to destroy our only life-supporting systems and destroying the fabric of society? We will not stand for that. And therefore, we will fight, and we ask you all to fight for us. And for the government, we are saying that we need a stronger environmental voice in politics. Because our country, for instance, have signed up to the Paris Agreement, and we've signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals framework as a signatory. And our people, our leaders keep on speaking about young people are the future, but at the same time, they are risking our future. And at the same time, they go and give fancy speeches at UN conventions about fighting climate change, but they remain silent of issues like the one that is at the doorstep of the Okavango people.
My last point is, why are we investing in fossil fuels? If we look right now, what is happening all over the world? Gas, the prices are slamming. Oil, Biden's administration, they are even talking about stopping to fund the fossil fuels. So why are we going into fossil fuels now when everyone is talking about renewable energies? Why are we not funding into something that is going to be less destructive to our environment and to our people? And then again, even BlackRock is talking about stopping the funds for the fossil fuels. So ReconAfrica is a junior company. What do junior companies do? They come in, find the oil, and sell it to the highest bidder. Exxon, because they don't even have the money to clean up the oil spills. We are now going to get all of this gas. At what price are we going to sell it in the future if we are just opening up the basin now? At what price if the prices are already slumming?
Let them know that young people are going to stand together and we are going to stop this ecocidal action.
hello everyone. I hope you really enjoyed this videos and felt as inspired and impassioned as I do right now. You may recognize Ina from our previous live stream. She spoke in the second video that we showed on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, and she was the one speaking out on this meeting. We heard that she was told off because of what she said, and she was threatened to be beaten because of standing up to defend her right to a decent livelihood. And just once more, I reiterate that it's important not to forget the incredible amount of courage and strength that it takes to stand up against companies like Recon, and even just showing their faces in the camera. That's a huge risk that many of us, we just take for granted, especially in the global north. But yeah, we have Jeff Barbee joining us here today right now, who he broke this news in the mainstream media, and he has been following this whole story from almost the beginning. So hello, Jeff. Thank you so much. Just wanted to say I appreciate very much you being here. I appreciate everything that you've done so far. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, and also what is your relationship with the Okavango? What? Believe you're muted?
It's the story of 2020, carrying over into 2021, and you're on mute.
Yes.
No, thank you very much, Alejandra. I really appreciate it. And I also, I have to say that this was not something that I did on my own. My writing partner, Laurel Nimi, is easily one of the most important people in this story. I also had a lot of help from a lot of other people. This whole project is something that we've been working on for about 4 or 5 months now. And I also have to say a big thank you to the team at National Geographic for really standing with us and helping us to create, the right response to this issue, and to make sure that we, get our facts straight and we work on this in a positive way and hopefully drive the type of change that's needed here. Myself, I come from a background of, I'm a photojournalist originally, and I started writing about 15 years ago for The Guardian. I usually write on climate change, science, and the environment. I'm also the director of a nonprofit that funds environmental investigative reporting and science investigative reporting. It's important to remember that these investigations take months, and they require the heavy, heavy lifting of many different people. So although these things appear on your news feed and look like something that we put together in a few hurried days, these stories take months, and it really comes from a great team. And I think that's something that we can all take with us. This tackling climate change is going to be a team project for our entire lives, and working together in a great team. It's super great. I mean, I saw how we set up this conversation now, and I can see that you guys also have a really great team. And I think, it's something that we can all take away from this, and remind ourselves that this is a long haul project to tackle climate change, and it's also one that is going to require us all to come together, maybe in many different ways that we have not yet been able to. And I look forward to that. My other side of the other hat that I wear is I'm a filmmaker. I made a film with my partner at the time called The High Cost of Cheap Gas. That film has been translated into 7 different languages. It's won a few small minor awards, but more importantly, it followed the threat of oil and gas development from the global north to the global south. Yeah.
Okay, can you tell us the name of the film?
Yes, sorry. It's called The High Cost of Cheap Gas. And
okay.
Yeah, we've got a live link that you can go to. I've got a master's cut on my YouTube channel. It's free. You don't have to pay.
Right.
Anyone can watch it, and you can share it. It's called the private director's cut. So anyone can find it. Just Google the high
Definitely.
cost of cheap gas, private director's cut. There's no advertisements, and we put it out there because we really wanted people to be able to share this and share the message. And what was interesting about it was we actually investigated the global business through the eyes of the scientists who were publishing on it.
Okay.
We started doing this in 2012. So for 3 years, we went to the Arctic. We worked with scientists who were studying climate change and methane emissions, which is a big problem. These fugitive methane emissions have sort of sullied the name of the global gas business, because the global gas business had billed itself as this, it was a bridge fuel to a more sustainable future. And that's how the fracking industry sort of unleashed itself on communities in the United States, with this belief that it was going to be cleaner than coal. But we've seen from EPA reports in the United States that any emissions from the US fracking industry that releases more than 3% of fugitive emissions means that it is actually dirtier than using coal-fired power.
Wow.
Yeah, this is serious stuff. And, we see numbers from Cornell University in the United States that fugitive emissions from our national grid, our pipeline infrastructure and everything else, we lose about 7%, which means that, relatively speaking, it's possible in terms of a climate changing gas, oil and gas, and particularly natural gas, this terrible name that people use, natural gas is actually twice as bad for climate change as burning coal.
Well, I would have definitely never thought that. I had no idea about that. And yeah, I guess that's like the important work of doing this investigation, and the role that journalists and media plays in sort of getting this stuff out. I was wondering, obviously it seems like you've worked a lot and researched and investigated this issue quite often. How do you see things that you've seen in other countries and in other regions applying to now the Okavango Delta? Are there any similarities?
So it's interesting. I looked very closely at my home state. I live in Africa at the moment, but I'm originally from Colorado. And we had a very busy drilling campaign since 2005 in Colorado. I think one good way of looking at this is thinking of it like these oil and gas companies first need to kind of disrupt the political process, the natural law that has basically governed the Environmental Protection Acts in the United States, for instance, the Community Right to Know Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Clean Air Act. And those three acts that were promulgated back in the 1970s, strangely enough by Richard Nixon, those acts sort of protect communities. And if you look back on pictures from the 1970s and you see how dirty New York was and how dirty the air was in LA, we actually have been solving these problems. And those three environmental laws in the United States were very powerful at protecting communities. But in 2005, the Bush-Cheney energy bill that was passed by the Congress at that time and then signed into law by George Bush and Dick Cheney, who was at the time had stepped down from the presidency of Halliburton, or the CEO position, which is an oil and gas company. They actually signed this into law that the fracking on American soil, oil and gas development, was exempt from those three acts.
Wow.
So what's interesting is that essentially what they could not unleash this sort of rampant oil and gas development in the United States, which turned America into the largest oil and gas producer in the world. So let's not forget, I mean, this has been highly successful. But the only way that they could do that was to actually pollute the law before they could pollute the local communities. And this is not, in any way an activist this is a scientific fact. I worked with a group at SIRES at the University of Colorado to show how these methane plumes are coming out of America's oil and gas fields. And what's coming out of them is not just methane. They were mapping methane from space, but they were also chasing down BTEX compounds, benzene, ethylene, toluene, xylene, I mean, this is in no way inflammatory. This is just a simple fact that these emissions from the oil and gas business in the United States, they do cause health problems. They cause cancer. They are endocrine disruptors. These are serious, serious pollutants that would have been totally controlled by the Clean Air Act, but it did not have any validity because of that Bush-Cheney energy bill of 2005. So to then turn that to a place like Namibia, the great thing about Namibia is that it has very strong environmental laws. They have a right to clean water, a right to an environment that's not harmful. And the great thing about Namibia is that people fought very hard to have those included in their Environmental Act of 2007. So obviously, if you're going to do this activity in a place that has strong environmental laws, then you're going to struggle, because the thing about this activity, it appears, and I'll just quote one of the scientists I worked with at the University of Colorado, and he said it's very hard to do this cleanly. It's very difficult to run an oil and gas operation cleanly. It's just very difficult. It's by its very nature, it is a
how could it be clean if the whole process is emitting CO2? So
yeah, and not only CO2, so there's CO2 emissions, but the methane, then there's also all the effluent that comes up out of the ground. Because what people forget is that inside of the shale seams, way down there at depth, 2,000 or 3,000 meters below the surface, there's often water in those seams. And that water is sometimes, in America, we've seen great investigation in Rolling Stone in October this year that it's radioactive. And that radioactivity is then unleashed on the communities that surround these oil and gas operations. We've seen that in Ohio. We've seen it in Pennsylvania.
So what is the justification that, for example, ReconAfrica uses to validate their operations at the moment?
Well, I think there's always this belief that if you find a big oil bonanza, the gusher comes out of the ground and the money comes with it, right? I mean, that's been, it's almost in like our human lore. Exxon was the biggest company in the United States and reigned like that for almost, I think it's 120 years. I could be wrong. It's somewhere around 110 years. But they've now been replaced by a renewable energy company for the first time about 6 months ago.
Wow.
So this is really, times are changing, but in the public consciousness. And I think it's not just here. Like, it's not like these guys have targeted Namibia because Namibia is soft. It's that they did exactly what they did in Colorado. They looked for a resource and they thought that they could make money. And these people are trained to do this. I was trained, I studied geology at university, and a lot of my friends who I studied with ended up being petroleum geologists. They're trained to look for oil and gas, and that's what they do. They don't know anything different.
Yeah.
And I think we can point fingers at places like Namibia and say, oh, you should be doing this. But they're really not doing anything different from what we did in Colorado. And I think it's important. I just would add to that. Sorry to step on you, Alejandra.
No.
But I would just point out that we need to keep in mind that we're all in this together. Okay, so these misguided folks who still believe that oil and gas is the future of energy in the world are obviously not listening to what GM said last week when General Motors Corporation said that they won't build any more petrol-driven or diesel-driven vehicles past 2035, I believe it was. So the writing's on the wall. It's up there. But it's almost like these are zombie companies that are sort of the undead. They're living from a time where they've passed their expiration date and they didn't get the memo.
Yeah, I always have this image in my head of like addict. It's almost like they're completely addicted and just scraping the last bits and refusing to really stop. I assume you've seen the Okavango Delta, like the region, you've seen the area. I guess for many of us who probably are watching this and have not been there, what is the place like? What are the communities like? And what could drilling of the scale that Recon is planning, what could that mean for that place and the people?
So the Okavango is a very special place, but it's only remained a very special place because people have protected it. And in this instance, you know, Botswana is the longest running democracy in Africa. It's also, it's been a leader in many ways of, I would say, frontline conservation practices. Botswana has been excellent at conservation and preserving not only its wildlife, but the livelihoods that depend upon it, and then capitalizing on that and making sure that, you know, people are lifted out of poverty by jobs that pay them really good wages, by bringing not only tourists, but also animal husbandry. Botswana has a massive cattle business, and they've managed to sort of meld these things together. Fortunately, their only other extractive business at the moment is diamonds, which they call gentleman's mining, because it has to be done so carefully. And there's no chemicals involved, you just dig a lot of holes. But the fact of the matter is that Botswana has been a very good environmental steward of its places, and in particular, the Okavango Delta. I'll tell you a very small story.
Go ahead.
I know we don't have a long time, but
No.
I had a chance to visit the Okavango Delta one of my very first times there. It was about 18 years ago. And we got in a makoro, and this is a long canoe, and usually they're made out of wood, but I went to visit some people because I was doing a story about how they had used fiberglass to model a makoro. And the fiberglass makoros that look like they're made out of wood are actually going to preserve the delta, because the jackalberry trees that they would make these long makoros out of are the things that cement the islands into the delta and prevent these islands from sort of flowing away every time there's a massive flood that comes. Because the Okavango floods every year like a big pulse. It goes, all the water comes down from the Benguela Plateau and it comes down and floods the Okavango. And that water comes there at a time when all the animals really need it, because it's the dry season in Southern Africa. So it's really this oasis of biodiversity. And my friend Karen Ross calls it, she wrote a book called The Jewel of the Kalahari. As you fly in, you see it sort of glittering. Wow. And in fact, on our first National Geographic story about this development, there's a picture of that from space. It's a beautiful image right on the lead of the story. And so the very first time I went there, I was in one of these new fiberglass makoros that, you know, that conservation groups had put together to make sure people weren't cutting down the trees, but yet it still looked very, and it's waterproof, unlike the wooden ones. And it also, they would fix it for free for the fisher, for whoever was running the makoro. As soon as they bought it, they would just fix it for free for life. So wow. Botswana has these amazing coping strategies to make sure that this long-term sustainable use model for the environment is adhered to. And I think one of the things that is really exciting is when we investigated this, we found that Namibia has been talking about turning this area where Recon has their drilling license at the moment into another World Heritage Site, and that it's been up for World Heritage Review status, because the Okavango doesn't exist in an isolation. It exists because it's a living river system, the last big river system in Africa that isn't dammed. And that's super important, because if you put a dam on this river, you're going to cause the river to change. You're going to change the water quality, and you're also going to stop that sort of seasonal pulse, that flood that comes in. It's like a heartbeat. And, you know, if you're going to look at what this means to that region, you're essentially saying, we don't want a new World Heritage Place. We don't want these community conservancies that we talk about in our stories. We don't want wildlife. We don't want a future with people depending on that for their livelihood, which is actually a big pivot, because that was sort of the story that everybody's been telling for a long time. They've established Namibia's conservancy program is world renowned. And, you know, getting people involved in tourism, but also in sustainable development within their communities in the north of the Delta. I worked with the Chikocha Trust for a while, about 6 years ago, on a plan called the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, which is the world's biggest park. And it stretches over these 5 countries, and it's bigger than Italy. And
Wow.
what's interesting is that Recon's drilling area is inside of the demarcated Okavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. It's called the Kaza. Yeah, it's really such a special place. And I've been honored to be able to spend a lot of time there and also to forge some great ties with some of the communities that depend upon it. So of course, when I first heard about this, it was those communities that I called.
And I guess often, I think I've seen this both like from Colombia as well, where, you know, areas that are incredibly diverse and meaningful, and they've, you know, people have been living there for generations after generations. And often these companies come and they bring in the promise of wealth, of money, loads of money. And that's one of the big things that they use in favor. Like, we're going to bring in development, we're going to bring in like loads of money to your region. How true is really this? Like, how much money would actually get to the communities, and like compared to the price that they would pay for losing their livelihoods? And I just wanted to ask, yeah, because you've been following this kind of industries for so long, how true are some of these claims?
I think I asked this exact same question of Mark Udall's, who's a congressman from New Mexico, his brother, Randy Udall, who had been fighting oil and gas development in America while everybody was sort of breathless and super excited about it in the late 2000s. And he said, who's making the money? And, you know, in his words, it is the executives of these companies. It is the contractors who do the business, like Schlumberger, Halliburton. They're all making money because they get paid. Whereas, you know, strangely enough, we have 63% of US fracking companies folded last year. They're not making money. Aubrey McClendon from Chesapeake Energy, he helped create the modern fracking boom. Chesapeake Energy never made money, not one single year. So what's odd is that you see this disconnect between, you know, who is promising the cash and who's actually getting it. And, you know, obviously in local communities where there's super high poverty and you come and say, we've got 8 jobs for you, and these jobs are going to be pretty well paid, that's kind of a big deal. But if those jobs come at the long-term expense of the rest of the community. And so I'll tell you about Lynn and Tweety Blancett in northern New Mexico. Lynn, a diehard Republican who campaigned for George Bush, and her husband, Tweety and her husband, Lynn. Sorry, Lynn. I hope they see this. They actually had a cattle farm. And, you know, cattle is a big business in New Mexico and Colorado. And on their cattle farm, they had 600 or 700 head of cattle, just like the people in the Okavango region of Namibia. And what was interesting is they did lease out some of their land for oil and gas drilling because they thought that they would make money. Within 6 years, they did not have a single head of cattle left. So this is a dangerous business for people who rely on clean water. And Lynn and Tweety Blancett fought the oil and gas companies as soon as they saw the harm that it caused to their farm. And, you know, they went from being these sort of dyed-in-the-wool oil drill baby drill to what have we done? And I think that that is an important lesson for everyone who's facing these types of developments, because the story that is told about oil riches, that money almost, in my experience and the research I've done, and this also comes from the US Department of Agriculture, it almost never trickles down to the people who have to deal with the long-term effects of this business.
Yeah, definitely. And I was saying, like, it's like the actual operations would completely obliterate, well, just like poison the land, poison the water systems, and therefore the livelihoods of people. And it's kind of hard, I guess, like, to even fathom what would be the fate of a lot of these communities, because if I'm not mistaken, from a last live stream I had, it's like 200,000 people Who's like?
Well, there's actually 1 million people estimated to depend upon the Okavango Delta and that region. 200,000 people, you're right. They live in Kavango East and West, you're right. But the people who depend directly on the Delta for their livelihood is about 1 million people. And what's interesting, and I think you're sort of exactly right also, that the type of pollution that occurs from oil and gas are these long-term, they're called persistent pollutants. These persistent pollutants accumulate in places where there is a spot where, for instance, the Okavango, if the viewers don't understand, it stretches out like my hand onto the Kalahari Desert. It flows, it's the world's second largest inland delta. It flows out onto the Kalahari sand and then it sinks down and evaporates. This is one of the reasons why it's so magical, because you get that pulse of water, but that also means that there's no outlet. And if you have pollution, and this is a joke from my time at university, the only solution to pollution is dilution. So if you don't have anything to dilute it, you have these persistent long-term pollutants ending up in the Okavango and poisoning the groundwater that people rely on from hand-dug wells and shallow wells. And it's important to remember, and this comes from the University of the Free State, who we quote in our last article. This is from Serena Esterhuis, that these pollutants, if they enter places like the Omatako River system that feeds the Delta during flood events, if they enter the Okavango River, which is along the entire way from the top of Recon's license all the way to where the Okavango Delta starts, it's 140 miles. And that 140 miles goes right up to that river. So ReconAfrica actually has an environmental clearance certificate right now, which inside of the EIA that allowed them to get that, allows them to drill right up to the river. And, in Colorado, we've seen that the oil and gas companies will impound parts of the riverbed of the Colorado River, particularly between the towns of Rifle, Silt, and Parachute. And when I did the last count there with a group called EcoFlight, I think we counted more than 170 wells that were in the riverbed during a flood event. So this is not something that is conjecture. This is a fact. This is something that these companies have done in other jurisdictions where there are environmental laws, and they have continued to do it even after we have proven through the Colorado School of Public Health, Lisa McKenzie's studies, that type of drilling has harmed people living nearby.
Wow, that's, yeah. In my, it just feels like outright violent, especially if there's so much proof and you've seen from experience from other places across the world about the consequences that it has, and to still go ahead with it. To me personally, it just feels like outright really violent, and it's like a form of, I guess, slower form of violence, really, that is perpetrated by these companies just for short-term profit at the expense, of people's lives. How did you find out that this was happening in the Okavango Delta, and how was your journey through sort of getting this published? And I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so thanks, Alejandra. It's an interesting question because as an investigative reporter, you're always kind of looking for something important that you can sort of sink your teeth into. And I think we had all kind of thought that this fracking idea in Southern Africa disappeared. The High Cost of Cheap Gas, the movie that I made, talks a lot about what was happening in Botswana at the time, where there was this sort of a small gas rush, but the government wasn't aware really that this was going on at the time. And we uncovered this happening. And in fact, the government banned fracking. Whether or not I actually have to backpedal on that. We're not sure if they actually banned it, but certainly the government came out against it. And they made very public statements saying that it was absolutely not allowed in the country, and they went on record to say that. So I think and most of the companies that were doing it were actually left the country. So it was not on my radar. You know, we're often looking at questions related to governance issues and mining rights. I've worked for The Guardian for many years, and that's mostly what we talk about there, which is coal mining and also positive stories about the growth of renewable energy in this region. But I found out about this through a network of people who sort of watch these things and they look at the industry press. And one of them sent me a text in mid-August and said, "This is concerning. I wonder if you have anything to say about this, given the experience you have in Botswana on this subject." And if it wasn't for that, I don't think any of us would have known about this until much later. Fortunately, I have great relationship with our paper of record here in South Africa called the Daily Maverick, and I was able to publish a small op-ed talking just a little bit about what this means and the possible dangers of it. And I think that was really what set off this whole mission of trying to understand whether or not these guys were serious. Lots of people didn't believe that they were going to come. I think people believed it was like a pump and dump stock scheme. But when I saw who was involved in this project, I knew that these were serious people.
So do you know of ReconAfrica being involved on any similar operations like this? Like, what is their track record so far?
I actually don't think that Recon itself has ever worked anywhere else. Its earlier incarnation in another business was in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
They left Mexico. We don't know why. I don't know.
And I was wondering throughout your journey and the work of your team, because of course, as you said, it's like a lot of people involved and behind this. Have you had any pushback for exposing this story?
People have been doxxed on Twitter.
The Twitter trolls.
We've had Twitter trolls. We've had hacking attempts, maybe hacking successes. But nothing profound. I think people are, interestingly enough, it's a good question because strangely enough, I think one of the things that is strange is that this is a business that's been doing this for so long that there are people who just don't see any problem with it at all. And they would happily buy stock and jump on board something like this if they thought that they could make a buck. And you'd be surprised, those people are common. And I think if we're looking for positive ways to make change, engaging people that who feel that way is a good way to make that change. And, we all know about, sort of putting our weight behind a cause. And, if, Extinction Rebellion, you guys are committed to fighting climate change. And interestingly enough, I think a lot of other groups globally are sort of looking at this type of activity and now seeing a problem with it, which is in a way has to be said. For the companies that are doing it, I have little sympathy. But for the countries that would like to take advantage of the resources that they have in ways that the global north already has, I do have sympathy, a lot of sympathy, because it seems patently unfair that countries in the global south should be prevented from capitalizing on resources that we went and just rampantly extracted and chucked into the atmosphere in the global north. However, it must be remembered, and this is my opinion, that we have an opportunity in the global south to do something that is called leapfrogging. So if you can bypass the dirty fossil fuel business and jump directly into renewables, and that's affordable and accessible to your country and to your energy mix, well, it's an opportunity to actually get ahead of the global north. And we see it here in South Africa. Our renewable energy procurement program for this country was set up in about mid-2000s. And in 2012, when I first started doing some reporting on it as a fellow doing climate change reporting, there was no renewable energy mix in this country at all. By 2015, using a tender process that got renewable energy built quickly and connected to the grid super fast. In only 2 years, we had increased that mix to about 12% of the entire energy mix of the 45 gigawatts we use here in South Africa. And today, on any given day, that sits at around 22%. So we have an opportunity in this country to really sort of end the region, to leapfrog these dirty choices of the North and actually propel ourselves into the clean, greener, and much more affordable energy of the future. Because when we look at projects like this in Okavango, you know, it's been mooted in government circles that this would solve energy problems, and that if they find gas, they can do gas turbines and gas-fired power stations. From the day, and this is proven from the CSIR here in Pretoria, is a quasi-governmental entity that does research into energy, and the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research. These guys, they came out with a really great breakdown. If you drill for gas today and you discover it tomorrow, it is going to be 11 years until you plug that electricity into the energy mix of this country. It's around that time. You got to build the infrastructure and the pipelines and all the facilities and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But if you want to put energy into the electricity grid a lot quicker, here in this country, using the Renewable Energy Procurement Program, the REAP process, you can actually go in 5 months and have a working solar field that's producing 80 to 150 to 250 megawatts of electricity, like that. And that rate 5 years ago was less than half the cost of coal power. Now, 5 years later, solar has only come down in price. It is now 1/10 the cost of coal power. And that is including keeping a regular coal-powered power station running, not building a new one. These numbers are powerful.
Yeah.
And I think they should speak to our leaders to remind them that this is an opportunity, a big opportunity.
Yes, I guess it's like not trying to tread the same path that has been before, and looking for a new path and not trying to follow in the steps of the global North in having such an extractivist-based economy and society in general, which could easily be, you know, it's leading to a lot of, you know, the burning of fossil fuels and reliance on petrochemicals for so long. It's big cause for the climate crisis that we're currently living in, and that a lot of people, primarily in the global South, are suffering through right now. I wanted to ask you, I guess, as a journalist, how do you see yourself as a journalist and the role of a journalist in these times, especially that we're living through?
We just tell the truth. And as odd as that might sound, I mean, I think the truth has taken a couple of hard hits to the gut lately. And, you know, when we're sitting here telling the truth, it can also seem like activism. This is not activism. These are facts. You know, nothing that we talk about in the high cost of cheap gas wasn't backed up 100% by published science. Nothing we talk about in any of the stories that I write is not 100% backed up by the best science, often with 2 different citations. And this is important to remember, because when facts start to sound like activism, we have a problem. So as journalists, and also as people seeking a better way forward, I think we all have a very strong responsibility to look at stuff very clearly, as clear as we can. And as journalists, we stick to these facts. And as long as we do that, I'll tell you one really funny thing, Alejandra. We did a look into this. I was with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting a long time ago, and I was talking to one of the researchers there, and he was saying that he thought that it cost between 100 and 1,000 times more to tell a lie in the public eye. So if you're going to go out and you're going to spout an untruth, you're going to have to spend between 100 and 1,000 times more money. So as long as we just keep telling the truth and telling it, we have to bankrupt these people because that's the only way they'll shut up.
Yeah, and even as you said, for doing something that can seem as simple as just telling the truth and getting out the truth there for people, you face surmountable, that there's a lot of challenges for simply trying to do that job. And I think, yeah, like just from what I heard, that you guys have, you know, been battling so far, and also from other acquaintances that I have that are investigative journalists, it is, you know, as simple as it sounds, in today's world seems quite hard, and it's, yeah, simple act of truth telling. Do you get the sense that the audience for journalism is changing, or that people are wanting to hear more of these like stories, or what sense do you get from the audience right now?
I get a massive I would say it's optimistic. It's because the ways in which we tell these stories are changing. I mean, look, we're talking in a way that didn't really exist for any of us until about 1.5 years ago. And I would say that as we look, I was thinking about it today. I was listening to The Daily from the New York Times, and they have a podcast called The Daily. So the New York Times has decided that they need to take their newsroom and really make it much more accessible. I was actually driving in Namibia, and I was listening to a reporter who I used to work with, and she was getting interviewed for this podcast. And to hear her voice sort of speak to me, she's a friend of mine. I did not know she was going to be on the podcast. It almost put her in the car with me. We'd been on many road trips through Southern Africa, shared Le Franier. And we really like, it felt closer to me. And I think my point here is that everyone's re-exploring how to tell stories, even the New York Times. And that tells you something about the current media environment. People are hungry. They do want to know the truth. And I think more people are becoming involved and actively engaged, particularly young people. And I think that that gives me a massive amount of optimism for the future. You know, I see that there is a hunger for facts, a hunger for the truth. And I feel like it's a huge responsibility, but it's also a great honor to be able to share that truth with people. And I see, like, I was speaking to a class at the University of Colorado, a journalism class, about this exact thing, with a great reporter, by the way, who's worked on oil and gas development in America for many years and now teaches there, called Keely Kernan. You guys should check her out. She's really cool. Yeah, she worked with the water walkers in the Mississippi Valley. Yeah, I just see so many people ready to tell these stories and to tell them in different ways, from people using Twitter and Twitter threads to communicate science to people, to an amazing doctor I follow who really has her finger on the pulse of the coronavirus epidemic. You know, there's a lot of ways to get news, and we really do need to focus, though, on the fact that telling the truth and telling facts is hard, it's expensive. And I do suggest that you guys find a media outlet that you trust and probably pay for it, because journalists also need to get paid. And that really gives us the independence that allows us to tell these truths to power and not be swayed from doing it by simple financial reasons.
Yeah. No, I do have a lot of respect for people doing this job. And as you say, I think for everyone to please take notice of this, like at the moment, you know, it's really important to support people, journalists, and even people on the ground who are wishing to share what's happening, their experiences, I guess, like Ina herself, like sharing what's happening and managing to get it out there and share it. So in some way, for everyone watching this, kind of asking to try and get this live stream out there, share it with your friends. It's on YouTube as well. You can catch up on the previous episodes. You can also send it to friends, you know, and tell your friends to reshare as well. And in some ways, we can help amplify those truths and reach to everyone, because at the end of the day, we all deserve and we all have a right to know this truth, because it concerns, you know, our own well-being as people, really. So Dev, just like a question to end then, are you hopeful? How do you feel about what's going in the Okavango Delta? Are you hopeful that, you know, people will make it, or what are your feelings?
I'm hopeful that we have seen the rise of collaborative community engagement. You know, ultimately, it's the choice of the Namibian people, what kind of future that they want to see. And without understanding what that future could really hold, it's hard for them to make an informed decision. And what we've seen through, you know, the engagement of scientists, the engagement of journalists, and the engagement of people on the ground, particularly from the community, we are starting to see, like, I think, a much better understanding of what people's future could look like with this development. And I think that that's very encouraging. And, you know, I do think that, you know, there's a huge project. The biggest solar farm in Africa is supposed to go forward on the border between Botswana and Namibia. It was supposed to be signed into law at the end of last year. I think COVID kind of slowed some stuff down, but this is also very positive development, because when we see countries like Namibia and Botswana sort of take advantage of the energy independence that comes with a long-term investment in renewables, that gives me great hope that there is a leadership position coming from this region that can also teach other countries, particularly in the global north, a few things themselves.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add or say.
No, only that I really appreciate it, Alejandra, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you all and to everybody else out there. And to remember, you know, you guys might all be stuck at home, but that doesn't mean you're stuck doing nothing. There's plenty for you to do. And I think that here, there's plenty of places to engage. And, you know, if you have a chance to get over also to National Geographic and put some eyes on their stories, not just the ones that I wrote, but the other ones, and give them some of your views, I think they would also really appreciate that. This is a time where we really all need to be working together to imagine the future we most want to see.
Thank you so much for that. We will share some of the links of the articles you published in our Facebook page beneath this for everyone to read and inform themselves more about the situation. And if I'm not mistaken, you've also written for The Guardian, you mentioned, so we'll also link people there and to the documentary. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Really appreciate all the time you're taking here. And please join us for the next live streams. We're gonna have more journalists, people talking about law, about politics, about reparations. So follow, you know, on Facebook and stay up to date. We will let you know who's coming next. But thank you very much for watching. I hope that all of you have been as inspired and feeling as hopeful. I think that's the word to end this live stream with. And I hope you're all feeling as hopeful as I am right now. Thank you very much for watching.